Here goes. All right, we are live. This is the Disciples of Yahweh, and this is our Truth Seekers meeting. I'm Scott Walton. My brother is Jody Bishop, and today we have a guest, a returning guest who's been on our show a few times and is becoming quite the regular. We're going to be talking about a very interesting topic about what happens after we die, from the scriptures, of course. We are a ministry, and we appreciate your likes and subscribes here on our YouTube channel and your prayers. We thank you for your support. And now here to introduce our speaker is Brother Jody.
Well, I am glad to have, I would say my mentor, he discipled me a lot of times. And he also, me and him I met him, and first time I met him, we started even debating on different subjects. And, I love the knowledge that he presented. I mean, we debated, and, we vigorously debated, but we did it in a kind and loving manner. And Jay's always used the salt and light principle. Give them a little salt, give them a little light, make them a little thirsty, give them a little light, and then they will see the truth. And, that's what he did with me, but he did it in love. If he'd have used another approach called the vinegar approach, why, you devil, you going to hell for believing that. Well, I probably would have turned him off. And if I hadn't turned him off, I would have probably, you better watch out, Jay. But, he did it in such a kind, loving way. And I think that's the way all Christians need to do. Whether we agree or disagree, we've got to be a Romans 14 congregation, a Romans 14 Christian. And that's what we do. If it's not essential, then we shouldn't divide over it. And the King James Version is one of them that's not essential to salvation. The color of your carpet is not essential to salvation. Or, whether your pastor wears a beard or not beards. We argue as Christians over things that's not important. But this is a very important issue that Brother Jay's going to come and talk to us about. He's going to be talking to us what happens to the soul or the spirit after the flesh dies. Where do you go after that? What happens? So let me introduce you to a fellow brother in Christ, a fellow minister. He's got a church. He's an elder at a church in Gardner, North Carolina, and he's got a website. I'll let him tell you about that. But let me introduce you to Brother Hess.
Thank you very much, Jody. Yes, thank you. This is a topic of what happens to you when you die, after you die, the soul and the spirit. And there's another term in there too. These are English words. And yeah, we're reading the Bible and we see these English words, but what do they mean? And there's a third one we're going to look at. In addition to soul, spirit, there's another one in there. It's sometimes translated as a shade, depending on your translation, or as a ghost. And going, what's up with that? I don't remember reading that. Well, it's in the scriptures, and we're going to talk about that tonight. And I realize that there is a debate, there is a discussion, there is questions, and some come to this topic already having a firm belief. I did 2 years ago, and I was certain on this particular topic some 35, 40 years ago. I was absolutely sure of it, and then I found out otherwise. And the answer is that the Bible's a big book, and we read it in English, and it may be just one translation that we like or that we typically use. Well, there's more to it than that, and I want to, as a little introduction here, just prepare people for understanding how we should be studying scriptures, or how I study scriptures, and where I've had to grow and resources that I've used to understand the scriptures better. Some will say, well, I read the Bible. I don't trust any Bible scholar, anybody with a PhD. Well, if you're fluent in ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek, and you have the ancient manuscripts in your collection, which I don't think you do, then you could say that you do not trust people that have a PhD. But if you're using a translation in English, you are definitely trusting someone with a biblical degree, because the manuscripts that the Bibles that we have today are from, they go back to ancient manuscripts in Hebrew and Greek. And just to put those manuscripts together in an edited text requires access to old manuscripts, and it requires knowledge of these ancient languages. Only someone with a PhD can get their hands on those things. And they look at these ancient Hebrew manuscripts, ancient Greek texts, often photographs, and put them together. And that person would be called, or the team of persons would be called, editors. What you are seeing in your Bible is not just one manuscript or the results of a translation of just one manuscript. These are often combinations of multiple manuscripts in Hebrew or in Greek. And then translators look at those texts and they puzzle over what the words mean. If you thought, well, you just look it up in a Hebrew or Greek dictionary, no, you do not. Some of these Hebrew and Greek words, some of them only appear once in the Bible. So how do you know what that word means? And you say, well, somebody in an ancient time had a Hebrew or Greek dictionary that took you from ancient Greek and Hebrew into modern English. No, there is no such thing. That's a whole long process done by scholars. So tonight we're going to talk about such issues and how scholars, we'll touch on it a little bit, on how scholars look at these words, use their Greek or Hebrew resources to figure out what these words mean. And there is still a debate. And that will be very important as we sort out this question about what happens to you after death, or what is life about, and is there something that goes on after death? So I'm going to talk this evening about, then there's three words here. In English, you could say the soul, yeah, spirit, that's often how it's translated. And the third one, as I said, might be ghost. And we're going to look at the Hebrew words for each and the Greek words for each. And I don't want to have to go into a lot of detail. I'm going to give some detail so that you have a framework to work off of, but I'm also going to give you a direction for further research. So, is there something that goes on that's immaterial after you die? So the first word I want to look at is the word soul that we use in English. In Hebrew, that's the word nephesh. And because that word in the Old Testament Hebrew, when Christians who spoke Greek saw that word, they would put it into an equivalent Greek word, psyche. Now, the thing to remember is that this Greek word was not invented by Christians. The Christians were using a word from the Greek language that they already knew that fit what they're talking about. So it's important to understand that, because if someone gives you a definition, well, what does psyche mean? Well, Greek translators will often use the word soul, sometimes not. Depends on the translation and whether they're trying to give you, the reader, the sense of what's going on. They might not use the word soul. If you want to know for sure, you need to get a Greek Bible. I have several here several of them here. This is one very well used. New English, the New Greek English interlinear. Okay, well worn. Particular Greek text. You can look it up. You can find them on Amazon.com. You can even get them, put them on a smartphone, and it will tell you what the Greek word is, give you some clues how to pronounce it and what it means. Still, there are difficulties in translating most or any word in Hebrew or Greek because the scholars have to look at the Hebrew word. A word in Hebrew may have a broad range, and they have to choose maybe an English word that has a slighter range, and they have to pick one that fits better than another. Or the reverse is true. The Hebrew word has a small range, and they have to think really hard, what Greek word shall we use, or English word rather, English word that matches that word. And that can happen with Hebrew or Greek. So this is not easy. So there's going to be some questions, and I'm going to try and clear them up as we go. So first word, soul. Hebrew word nephesh, Greek word psuke. And this meaning of this word, how would you know it means? You can, for yourself, if you've got a good lexicon plus a good Hebrew concordance with a Greek concordance, you can look up every word, every verse that has this word, either of those two words, Hebrew and Greek, and read them for yourself and see the context of them. I have done this for the word soul and spirit myself personally. Years ago, got out, and I'd had an opinion before I read every verse that has these words, and after I was done, I go, oh my, I think I've been misled. Maybe the persons who taught me, maybe they didn't intentionally mislead me, but they did pick and choose what verses they wanted me to see. But after I got a concordance that was tied to the Hebrew or the Greek, I got a different picture. And I noted those words, and I asked myself, what does that word really mean as I look at it in this context? And I got a surprise from what I originally had been taught or learned in my upbringing. Soul has a broader meaning. It has a range of meaning. That's not odd. Even English words can have a broad meaning depending on what the word is. So we can say a word mount or mountain or table, and there's different various details of different meanings. Okay, so I'm going to mention some things, and first of all for soul, and then we're going to do it for spirit, and then this final word, ghost, which is really important to understand, and it helps nail things down. So for soul, the nephesh, well, nephesh, and very much like the Greek word too, has a range, and it can mean just a living, breathing thing. They tend to be breathing, living things. In Genesis, is used of animals too. That's a surprise, unless you get a good, as I say, Hebrew concordance that lists every verse and you go see it. You go to Genesis 2:7, and Genesis 2:7 is people, but Genesis 1, which is about things that God created, Genesis 1:21, it's about animals. And when you go to Genesis 9, the flood, what did the flood kill? Animals. In the New Testament, the word psuke in Revelation 8:9 refers to animals. So it can refer to living, breathing thing, even fish. And that's a very large number of occurrences and uses of that word. These things, souls, if you like, nephesh, psuke, they can die. So can the soul die? Well, that kind of soul, yes, of course, it dies. But there are other meanings of the word soul in the Bible. So, for example, you want to go to the Old Testament, you can read Psalm 16, 9 through 10. That's a nice verse. It's prophetic of the Messiah. and that his soul would not remain in Sheol. That Hebrew word Sheol is the place of the dead. That doesn't sound like a physical body. In fact, that's a different word for body or grave. Either of those two words. There's different words for that. This is, we would translate it soul, but as you read the context of this in the Old Testament here, Psalm 16, it doesn't sound, it's not referring to a body. There is a word for body, that's not it. And Sheol, as we'll probably get to even tonight, is not the word for grave. It's a different word. What does it mean? Now, the use of soul when it's something that's not material is not as many occurrences. The dominant use of nephesh is for a physical breathing animal. But sometimes it's not material. As I said, Psalm 16 is a fine example. In the New Testament, you can go to Matthew 10:28. It distinguishes soul from body there in Matthew 10:28. Scott, I don't know if you can bring up Matthew 10:28.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
where Jesus
here it comes.
warns them. Great.
It says, and do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell.
You know, that soul there does not sound like a physical thing. And it's not. What is it? Well, we learn from context. And I'm going to just leave it here for a moment. That soul here is not a physical thing. In fact, it says people cannot kill the soul. Okay, so what is it? It's something that's alive and you can't kill it. Now, you could say it's a metaphor, it's figurative, it's not real. Well, we're not going to stop here. As you keep going on, you'll find out that the soul and related words, which we're about to see, is not, you cannot always say, oh, it's metaphor, it's figurative, it's metaphor, it's figurative. It sounds real. And in this case, Jesus said, do not fear. Do not fear those who can kill the body. Okay, they understood that what that was, but cannot kill the soul. Okay, you might think that's kind of figurative, but whatever it is, it's important. And here, the next phrase says, rather fear him who can do what? He can kill or destroy both soul and body. Oh, okay, so the soul can be killed. Now, if the soul is a metaphor, what is it a metaphor of? What is it figurative of that could be killed? Well, if it's not physical, or if it's not a real thing, it's a figurative of something, then kill all of a sudden has a double meaning in this one verse. It's killing the body, which is a real verb to kill, and it's a figurative killing of a figurative soul. Well, you may come away with that conclusion and run away with it. I'd say just hold that thought. We're going to find out that that's not the case. I'm not going to read every verse, but I'm going to pull out some good examples for you. This is just a beginning intro, something to think about for that being true. Another one is Revelation 6, 9 through 11. Scott, if you bring that one up, Revelation 6, 9 through 11. Okay. And yes, this is a vision. I get that. But John sees in vision. What does he see? He sees this altar, heavenly altar, and there's these souls underneath it. And these souls cry out. Now, I get Revelation is largely figurative, but it's figurative of something. And in this vision, there's no way that I believe that John has got a vision of pagan things or pagan teachings, pagan ideas, or he's drawing on pagan ideas to teach a Christian message. That doesn't work for me. Maybe it does for someone else, but it doesn't work for me. He's seeing something. He says, I saw. So he's seeing something of those who have been slain. So this is dead something. Must be something visible. But in his mind, he uses the word soul, and yet they're dead. So he's not drawing on a pagan idea. He's drawing on something that a Christian way back then, reading Revelation, would understand and believe. So the soul is something, and in verse 10, it can cry out. So I get that could be a figurative action for these souls that maybe they can't truly cry out. Maybe they're not truly underneath the altar, although that's what the vision shows. That might be figurative. But the main thing being addressed here is that John sees something. And they do cry out, and they do communicate, and they have thoughts. So something on there is got to relate to something the Christian reader would believe and understand, and is not reverting into some pagan ideas. So I'm going to kind of leave that for this word soul, that it does seem that there is a meaning that is beyond the physical breathing animal, that's something that goes and exists after death and is something to think about, that could potentially cry out. We're going to hold that thought because we're going to come back to it. So what I want to say is summarize that within the meaning of soul, there is a second meaning of a something that that goes beyond death. It's not material. It is a component of the human. What it is exactly, well, we'll just have to wait and see. All right. A third meaning is just a life principle. And that's one that some people focus on. Okay, the soul is just a life principle, not a thing that goes and exists after death. Well, okay, Scott, I'm going to have you bring up, I'm going to have you bring up Psalm 16, 9 through 10. Thank you. Psalm 16, famous. Peter quotes it in Acts chapter 2. This is the prophetic prophecy about the Messiah who dies. And this person in Psalm 16, who originally might not have understood who it was, and then Peter in Acts chapter 2 explains, you may not have understood who this is, you Pharisees, but this is speaking of the Christ. He says, therefore my heart is glad and my whole being rejoices, my flesh also dwells secure. Okay, his being, all right. But verse 10, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol. That sounds like something that exists after death and is not left in Sheol, and that is the place of the dead. That's not Sheol, as we'll talk about later. That's not the grave. There is a Hebrew word for grave, and that's a different word there. This is the Hebrew word Sheol. And then he says, you will not abandon my soul to Sheol. You will not let your Holy One, Holy One, see corruption. Peter ties that and said, that Holy One, you know who that is? It's not King David who's writing this. It goes on in Acts chapter 2. This can't be David that he's talking about himself, because, folks, David is dead, and his tomb would still be there, buried in that area of the palace there in Jerusalem. So who is he talking about this there in Acts chapter 2? And he says, it's the Messiah, the Christ. His soul was not left in Sheol. He did not see corruption. His body. And you say, wait a minute, body? Where do we get that? Oh, the previous verse, 9. His flesh will also dwell secure. His flesh did not stay in the grave. His soul did not stay in Sheol. And the Holy One, who is the Holy One? The Messiah. His body did not see corruption. And then verse 11, he says, you will make known to me the path of life. What does that refer to? The resurrection. It says, in your presence. Whose presence? The Father's presence. In your presence, there is fullness of joy. This is talking about the resurrection. And it says, at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. He's resurrected to the right hand of God. And if you go to Acts chapter 2, you'll see Peter explains it that way. Okay, so there's examples in the, again, that's an Old Testament reference to nephesh, soul, that it exists after death. It's not just a principle of life, and it's a human, essential part of the human. And it goes to a place. It goes to a place, Sheol. And we're going to talk more about Sheol in a moment, but I want you to understand that soul, this is the first word, has three possible meanings. There's a range of them. Again, a life principle, one, a non-material, but it's personal part of the human. And third, a physical person or a physical animal. And that's just some of the verses. Those are some of the more prominent ones, and we'll just stick with that for now. Next one, spirit, English spirit. Hebrew word ruach, Greek pneuma. And this, instead of having a broad three meanings, has more two meanings, both Hebrew and Greek. It, like soul, has a meaning that's of the life force, life principle. Soul has that meaning, both Hebrew and Greek. And spirit has that meaning, both Hebrew and Greek. It's a life force, and it can even be possibly for the life force in an animal. There's not a whole lot of verses that say that, but it is certainly possible. But the one I want to focus on is it's an immaterial part of a person. And this is what some folks find debatable, but we are going to talk about it. That this immaterial part of a person continues to exist after death. This is what the point of course, what we're doing tonight is. I'm going to have Scott, if you would bring up a verse, Psalm 31:5, as an example. All right. And because this is Psalm, this is Hebrew, but you'll recognize that this is something Jesus quoted, but in the Psalms, it says, into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord. That's the divine name of God. I use the word Yahweh, calls him faithful God. Okay, there's that word ruach in Hebrew, my spirit. It's a thing. It's, and he says, you have redeemed me. So is the psalmist saying, well, God, you are alive, or you have life. This is my spirit. You have redeemed me. This spirit here is personal. So if, as I did, I came from a religious background that said the spirit is never personal. Why call it my spirit? You have redeemed me, not everybody else, but you have redeemed me. So this spirit, we learn from this, it is personal, and from other passages, we'll see that it exists after death. So this idea of this immaterial part that belongs to the person and that exists similar to soul. So scholars will say that spirit and soul overlap. That's not odd to have different words that have very similar meanings. We call them synonyms. And indeed, in Hebrew poetry, this happens a lot. There'll be a poetic statement, and it'll have a phrase that has a meaning, and then immediately followed by a similar statement, almost identical, but different words having a parallel thought. So it's not odd to say that soul and spirit can overlap and have similar meanings. Okay, we're going to now, Scott, if you would bring up Acts 23, 6 through 9. Acts 23, 6 through 9. Now here, obviously this is New Testament, so it's Greek, but we're going to look for occurrences of a reference to the word spirit, all right? Now, Paul has been arrested by the Pharisees or the Jews, and it's a big gathering of different groups within the Jews that are religiously a little bit different. They have their debates, they have their differences, and Paul realizes he's been arrested by them. So in verse 6, Acts 23, 6, he says, now, when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other part Pharisees, Paul, knowing this very well, says, I can divide this body of people. Because, as we'll see, that the Sadducees did not believe in the physical resurrection. And that's why they were sad, you see. Okay, that's a very old joke. Okay, and the other Pharisees, they did believe in the physical resurrection. It hadn't happened much. You don't see that happening much, certainly not in the Pentateuch. You don't see references to actual physical resurrections. We do have, we as Christians believe the concept of the resurrection, because we know in Genesis that Abraham was told to go sacrifice his son, and that was a tough thing to do. And Hebrews quotes that, chapter 11, and says Abraham, or refers to it, in Hebrews 11, Abraham believed in the resurrection. And indeed, as you go back and read about Abraham takes his son to be sacrificed, he believed God could raise the dead because he trusted in God's promise that he would see his generations come through his one and only promised son. So Paul is playing off of that here, of these two groups. And if you wonder about what the Pharisees and Sadducees believe, yes, you're going to read this in scripture, but you can also read about an ancient Jew in the first century by the name of Josephus. He comments there on what these groups believed and confirms what we're about to see. All right, back to Acts here, 23. He says, Paul cried out in the council, says, brothers, because they're all Jews. He says, I am a Pharisee, son of Pharisees. And that's true. He holds to these Pharisee core beliefs about the resurrection. And he says that here, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I'm on trial. And that's not a stretch. You're thinking, is Paul stretching this? Is this really about the resurrection? And the answer is yes, because what is the core belief for Christians? The resurrection of Christ. So that is why he's on trial. And Paul is very clever about this. And he says, that's what I'm on trial for. He says, verse 7, and when he said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. So immediately Paul has got his Pharisee friends on his side, because this is a fighting debate between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And this immediately starts a debate. So verse 8, for the Sadducees say there is no resurrection. There is nor angel. Now, I'm not an expert on Sadducees. I think it's pretty hard to find out exactly why they believe what they did, because we don't have much remaining of what they taught. But we know that they did not believe in the resurrection nor angels. And there's a third thing they did not believe in. What does it say there? Spirit. Now, did the Sadducees, when this is written, of course, by Luke, writing about Paul's experience, did Luke really mean to say they don't believe in a resurrection nor angels? No. Luke records they do not believe in a resurrection nor angels nor spirits. These are three different things. So what is spirit here? Is spirit just a life force? So the Sadducees, they don't believe in a resurrection or angels or a life force. Well, that's ridiculous. Sadducees, of course, believed in a life force. And they believed in references in the Old Testament when in the Genesis chapter 1, God's spirit hovered over the waters. Of course they believed in the spirit. So what is Luke speaking about here in verse 8? Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, be a physical resurrection. They don't believe in angels, and I'm not sure why they didn't. And that's not left recorded for us. But Luke adds they did not believe in spirit. What kind of spirit must have been? Well, the spirit we've been talking about. That it is an immaterial part of the body of the human that continues to exist after death. Let's keep reading. He says, but the Pharisees acknowledged them all. All what? All three. Not both, but all three. Resurrection, angel, and spirit. Okay. So we keep going down to verse 9. Then a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes of the Pharisees' party stood up and contended sharply. Okay, get this. We find nothing wrong in this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him? It didn't say spirit and an angel, or just a spirit. There's two things that could have spoken, they say, to Paul. What are those two possible things? A spirit or an angel? And remember, this is to start a fight here between the Pharisees and Sadducees. Sadducees would say that this spirit that the Pharisees believe in, they don't believe in. Well, can God speak? Yeah. Can God's spirit speak? Sure. Sadducees would believe that. So what is it that the Sadducees don't believe in? Something that has gone on after the death of a human, or an angel, so a spirit or angel, they didn't believe in either of them, could have spoken to Paul. You say, well, that spirit refers to demons. This is not a positive thing to say that demons here are talking to Paul. No, the Pharisees are saying a spirit may have spoken to Paul. It's not talking about demons. There is a word for demon. That's not it. Or wicked spirit. That's not there. But it's a spirit, and it can talk. And as we'll see, that as we continue on, the spirit continues to exist after death from humans. And the Pharisees believed it was possible for them to talk. Didn't happen a lot, but they believed in the possibility of it. All right. Now I want to look up another passage here. Let's see. Let's try Luke. I think it's end of Luke chapter 8. So if you would pull up Luke chapter 8, it's sadly it's not in my notes. End of Luke chapter 8.
Oh, the end of the chapter.
Yes.
All right.
Around about verse. Pull my other notes here.
Okay, we have the resurrection of Jairus's daughter.
There it is, verse 55. Let's scroll down to verse 55. So she's raised, and he says, child, arise. And does it say the spirit returned or her? Her spirit. So this is not generic life returned. Her spirit returned. And she got up at once. So I understand there may be some other metaphor that we're looking for, but my point is that in the biblical text, in the Christian text, there is this idea of a girl having a spirit that went out and returned. Is there another way of looking at it? Yeah, there is. But I wanted you to see that there is in Scripture a reference, this is not the only one, to a personal spirit, hers, and it goes out and it comes back. But my favorite reference is the one that we look there in Acts, which contrasts the Pharisees with the Sadducees, and personalizes it, and it can speak. All right. That is the one definition within the two possibilities for spirit. One is this immaterial part that comes from a person, could come from a person, and exists after death, and may, under some circumstances, be active, may even speak. All right. And yet, as I acknowledged before, spirit in the New Testament or Old Testament could refer to this life force. And indeed, there is examples of that, of it referring to a life force. So there's two meanings. There is a third word. A third word. And most folks who study this topic don't even know to talk about this, because this one has one meaning. Well, one meaning in Hebrew, another meaning that's very different in Canaanite, in Ugarit, in Ugaritic, from the city of Ugarit. In Hebrew, it's in Hebrew, it's Repha, that's the singular. It only appears in the plural, Rephaim, in the Old Testament. It occurs just 8 times. Now, if you decide, well, I better research this, let's see what Brother Jay has got going here, and you look up Rephaim, there are other words, but they have a Canaanite origin that have a different meaning. Yes, they sound alike. And that's not terribly odd to find out that another language being spoken in that region of the world, Ugaritic, that's what we call it, Ugaritic, that scholars study those languages because there's some parallels, there's some overlaps. Scholars can learn a little bit about Hebrew by studying Ugaritic. Okay, but sometimes those words sound very much alike, and when you write it in Hebrew, which does not have vowels, and you have to provide the vowels, that word could sound similar, somewhat alike, maybe exactly alike, but have a different meaning. So I'm going to address that before I get into it. Someone says they're off typing right now, researching Rephaim. Scholars look at that, and some think, well, the Canaanite meaning and the Hebrew meaning, oh, they must be the same. Well, the Canaanite meaning refers to large Canaanite pagan ancient warriors and heroes of old. And then they look at the Hebrew meaning of Rephaim, which has to do with the dead, and they try and combine them. Oh, Rephaim refers to ancient giant ruler heroes that are now dead. Okay, well, we're going to look up at a couple passages, and Scott, if you bring up that Proverbs 2:18 and 9:18, and we're going to look at these, and this is where the word Rephaim appears. Okay, so here's 2:18. Now in Proverbs 2, if you may remember the book of Proverbs, it's a father writing to his son. We think of Solomon writing this to his son, and there the popped up Hebrew Rephaim. So let's read verse 18. Now in the context here, Solomon is cautioning his son that when he gets older to watch out for the wayward woman that might be in Israel. She's a prostitute or an adulteress. You don't want any part of her. Stay away. And why? In verse 18, why? Because her house sinks down to death, and her paths to the Rephaim. Okay, so her house has a path that leads to death. And here's a parallel thought. House leads to death, and her paths to what? Well, in a Hebrew parallel, death and this word here, Rephaim, would be synonyms. Her path to her house leads down to death, and her paths following her lead to the Rephaim. So in Hebrew, these must be synonyms. So if you think, okay, death, which is one Hebrew word, is a synonym of ancient pagan warriors, pagan warrior kings who are now dead. Well, in Canaanite, they weren't actually dead. They were just ancient warriors who, yeah, but historically they would now be dead. But where's the parallel? So this translation realizes that and doesn't translate it by her paths lead to these ancient pagan warrior kings who are now dead. They don't translate it that way. They've researched this word Rephaim and concluded it means to the dead. But it's not the typical Hebrew word for dead. It's another word. It's a word that only appears 8 times in the whole Old Testament. So if you read another verse that refers to the dead, it'll probably say dead. This translation is trying to make a distinction between the normal word for dead and another English word that means dead, and they've chosen departed. And it's something. It's not a dead body, but it's rather the departed dead. And what's the point of this message? Son, watch out for the wayward, sinful woman, because you're thinking this house leads to something pleasurable. It doesn't. It leads to death, and it leads to the departed. It's not exactly the word for death, because it's referring to those who are dead. They are the departed. And indeed, as we saw in the note there, it says Rephaim, it's plural. You see, it leads to some things, not something, but some things. It's plural. It's more than one thing. It's more than one dead thing. Now we're going to compare this with Proverbs 9:18. So Proverbs 9:18. All right, same kind of story, that you follow this wayward woman and it leads somewhere. And again, this is in Hebrew poetry, and there are parallels. It says, he, this fellow that's following this poor woman, does not know that when he gets to her house, what's there? The dead. Now that's, again, you see the note there, it's on the screen, Hebrew Rephaim. This is not referring to ancient pagan warrior kings. It's saying this path of following this woman leads to the dead, and it's plural. Now in English, dead, it's death or dead, you don't necessarily know that it's plural, but in Hebrew it's clearly plural, because the suffix im, Rephaim, tells you it's plural. It's like adding the word s in English. So this path, and this fellow, this silly fellow, doesn't know where it leads. It leads to not to pleasure, it leads to the dead, plural. And they are there. They are where? Well, it's in her path, it's where it leads. Well, let's read the parallel Hebrew phrase, and we'll know exactly where these dead are. It says that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. See the parallel thought? It's not speaking about these ancient pagan warrior king heroes. It's referring to the dead that have followed this woman, that this ultimately leads to your real death. If she's an adulteress, this is a death penalty, by the way, but you're also spiritually, in your relationship to God, dead. So her guests, he wants to paint this picture. He says, son, don't follow these ladies. Do not do this, because you are going to be a guest in the depths of Sheol. Now, wait a minute. As we're going to see when we talk about Sheol, when we get a chance to do that, this is saying that the Rephaim, where they go when they die, is in Sheol. But there are verses that say the soul of a dead person. We saw that in Psalm 16. The soul also goes to Sheol. So we see a parallel here with the thought we saw in Psalm 16:10, that just there, as it said, the soul, which is the soul of the Messiah, would not be left in Sheol, but Peter in Acts 2 reminds him, well, he did go to the grave. And the Bible teaches that, as we'll see in a bit, later on when we talk about Sheol, that the nephesh, the soul, goes there. Here we see that the Rephaim go there. That tells us that there's a parallel thought between soul, in Hebrew nephesh, and the Hebrew Rephaim, which is, we typically translate something. Here it's dead. Other translations will say shades. That's an Old English term that meant ghost. If you didn't know what shades are, shades of the dead. Why do we call it, why is it called shades? Because if you're standing out in the noon, well, not in the afternoon sun, and you look at the ground, what do you see? Something that's kind of like you, kind of looks like you, but it's not really there, is it? It's very thin. It's just your shade that you cast across the ground, and it follows you wherever you go. So in Old English, the shade meant this ghost thing that's kind of attached to you, that follows you around. They didn't actually mean the literal shade, but that's a word that they used that meant what we would say today is ghost. Some translations may actually use the word ghost. But for the point of Proverbs 9, the intent is just to say, son, do not follow these ladies. It leads to death. It leads to being part of the departed. Where? In Sheol. Okay. So my point of that is that Rephaim does not refer to the idea of these pagan warrior kings from ancient times. Now, I'm going to mention one other case of Rephaim. Now, these others may not be as clear. I think the one in Proverbs 2:18 and 9:18 clearly are not warrior kings of ancient times. We're going to look at others that one may, I think it's really the Canaanite term. I don't think so. And that's why I refer to these two in Proverbs. Scott, if we could look to Isaiah 26, 14 through 19. I like especially 26:19. All right, Isaiah 14:19. Perfect. We're going to look at 14, and then we're going to scroll down to 19. Okay, that's what we'll do. So verse 14 says, they are dead, they will not live. They are shades. There is your word for Rephaim. So in the grave, as Isaiah is foretelling that the bad guys, they are killed. God brings judgment on them. They're dead. The really bad guys, they're not going to live. God's going to kill them. They are, what does he say they are? There's a parallel thought in Hebrew. They are dead, they are shades. That's the parallelism there. Then they will not live and they will not arise. Okay? That tells you that these things are really dead. And that's God's intent. We know Daniel speaks of the resurrection of even the wicked, but they don't come back to physical life where they live in God's kingdom. So that's why it says these guys will not arise. They're not going to arise in God's kingdom. But Isaiah is just revealing not so much the future of all dead, rather he's talking about the judgment upon the wicked. And he says they are dead, they are shades. So here you again see the parallel, the dead with the shades, or the Rephaim. It's plural. These are ghosts. In English, we could use the word ghosts. So we're going to scroll down to verse 19. And the meaning here changes. Now he switches, Isaiah speaking to, switching to the good guys. And let's say scroll up just a bit to get part of verse 18. Okay. This is talking about the inhabitants of the world, previous phrase, and the inhabitants of the world have not fallen. So there is some, okay, we've accomplished no deliverance in the earth, and the inhabitants of the world have not fallen. So there are some decent people. Verse 19, your dead shall live. Now, the previous bad guys, no, they're not going to be raised to the kind of life that the good people will get, the ones that God grants eternal life in his kingdom to. Verse 19 says to God, your dead shall live. Their bodies shall rise. Oh, so here's a verse that teaches the physical resurrection. Their bodies shall rise. Okay, you who dwell in the dust, so Isaiah is speaking to those who are dead in the ground, dwell in the dust, awake and sing for joy. Ah, this is a resurrection. For your dew is a dew of light, and the earth, see, that's where the dead are, will give birth to the Rephaim. Now, this translation says dead, but in the Hebrew, there's our word for Rephaim. Now, try and fold into this the idea, the Canaanite idea, that this is really talking about ancient pagan warrior kings. Okay, that just doesn't fit here. Your dead shall rise, and the earth, beginning of verse 19, your dead shall rise, and the earth will give birth to the ancient warrior pagan kings. No, I'm not seeing that. So as you explore and research the word Rephaim, and if you get somebody that says, oh, this refers to ancient warrior pagan kings, I think you can see that these verses would say otherwise. Who is this referring to? Is it the earth will give birth to the life principle? No. It's talking about, what did we see in beginning of verse 19? The dead shall live. These are dead persons, dead humans. They're dead. They have bodies. Their bodies shall arise. So the bodies are involved. And then the earth will give birth to the Rephaim. So putting this all together, we've seen in Proverbs that where does the bad path lead? To the dead. And what condition are these persons? They're dead. We're not talking about living persons. And they go to the place of the dead, Sheol, because they follow the adulterous woman. But those who are right in God's eyes and worthy of the resurrection of the righteous, what will happen to them? You find the answer, Isaiah 26:19. Their bodies will rise, and the earth, it's like giving birth to the Rephaim. Are they still dead after they're resurrected? No, they're not still dead. So this is not referring to ancient pagan warrior kings. It's not referring to dead people who are still dead. So what are the Rephaim? Well, the Rephaim are the dead, and it's plural. How many dead? Billions of people are dead. Some of them, as well, we saw up above when it's said that some of these Rephaim are not brought back into God's kingdom. That was in previous verse 14. Here, these Rephaim are. So the Rephaim are in two kind of categories, those that will be raised in God's kingdom here and those that won't. They'll spend, they'll be someplace else. But this says the earth will give birth to them. This is a good clue. I think it's a strong clue of what Rephaim refers to. These are dead spirits, human spirits. They exist. It's not a life principle, a generic life principle. It is tied to the person so that it is that person that is raised. Yes, they have a body, but where is the essence of who they are? It's the Rephaim, the ghost. All right, now I've been spending my time here on the Hebrew, but I wanted you to see it and know that Rephaim, Okay, it doesn't occur a lot, but you see in these key passages, I think it's easily seen what it is. But people that study this topic don't always focus on this. Why not? Because they're reading the Bible in English. And they read through Isaiah or Proverbs, and they never realize, because they don't see the word spirit there or soul, or they get to Isaiah and they see the word shades. Well, what does shades mean? Oh, I don't know. I'll just keep reading. Or dead, depending on your translation. Okay, they don't see any idea of that this might be something that exists even in Sheol, as we saw in the parallel thought there in Isaiah, that there's a parallel there, or I'm sorry, in Proverbs, parallel that they go to Sheol. Now we're going to go to the New Testament. Now, we're going to go to Matthew 14, 24 through 27. Scott, if you would bring that up, Matthew 14, 24 through 27. Now, this is pretty famous. Jesus walks on water. Everyone knows this story. And what I want you to wonder about is that did the disciples of Jesus believe in unicorns or leprechauns? Okay, that's the question I want you to think about. All right. What did they believe in pagan ideas, in fairy tales? Was this a common thing? So let's read that. Beginning in verse 24. This is, of course, the disciples have set out on the boat. They're on the water. Jesus was on the shore. Okay, verse 24. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, what time is it? Nighttime, fourth watch of the night. It's late. He came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples, it didn't say a disciple, it's when the disciples, plural, saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a unicorn." No. It is a leprechaun. No, it is a ghost. This is a Greek word that parallels the idea of Rephaim, or Repha, which would be the singular. This is phantasma. So this is a Greek word. It is not invented by Christians or Jews. It is used by Greek-speaking Christians and Greek-speaking Jews to refer to something. And here we have the disciples speaking about what they thought they saw. They didn't think they saw a unicorn or a leprechaun. Did all of them think they saw something that was pagan, that doesn't exist, and every Jew would have known? No. Now, these Jewish disciples, they would have been of the Pharisee type of thinking, not necessarily a strong Pharisee member, but they were generally influenced heavily by the majority view, which was Pharisees. And what do Pharisees believe in? Oh, we saw that in Acts. They believed in a spirit. Now, if you're wondering, well, that would have been an angel or maybe a demon. Well, here is a different Greek word. And if you're wondering, well, what does this word phantasma mean? I look at here, and how do I know that that's really the meaning is ghost? Answer, if you get a good lexicon, Liddell and Scott lexicon, which is not just biblical terms, because if it was just biblical terms, it would have only one entry, because this word phantasma only appears here in the Bible. Does it appear in other Greek literature? Yes. And wherever it appears in Greek literature, if people are awake, because it could mean some kind of vision thing, a vision in a dream, but if they think it's a thing, in Greek literature, it was the typical word they used for ghost. This is what they would say they saw. They don't mean just a vision like you're having a full dream of all these things happening in a vision. It meant one thing, a ghost, not a unicorn, not a leprechaun or a vision of coming attractions. It was a thing, the spiritual part of a human after the person died. That's what this word means. And this translation does it correctly. You study Greek, ancient Greek writings, and you find out that it's not just a vision or a demon, but rather they thought it was from a dead human, a ghost. So was it a dead human that the disciples saw? No, but it's what they thought they saw. The disciples did not get this because they were pagans or influenced by pagans. These disciples really did not like to fellowship with unclean Gentile pagans. Where did they get this idea to call it a ghost? Well, they were Jews who studied the Bible, the Torah, the Old Testament. And in their culture, not just one disciple called them that, but these disciples all in that culture called this thing that they thought they saw as a ghost. And it's, what does it say? And they cried out in fear. It wasn't one person having a vision or a dream or falling asleep. They weren't asleep. They're all being buffeted in the boat by the waves. And in this bouncing around, they saw something walking on the sea, and they thought, what in the world could this be? It looks like a ghost. Verse 27, but immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. So we know it was not a ghost, but it's what the disciples thought they saw, because disciples believed in such things. Okay, so my point is that in the Jewish mind, Old Testament or New Testament, they believed in such things. So, as we saw above, where in Acts 23, when Paul referred to that he was being put on trial for the resurrection, and then the Pharisee stood up and said, you know what? It might have been a spirit that spoke to him, that said these things to him, which upset the Sadducees, but the Pharisees, yeah, it could have been a spirit. Now you know, in the Jewish mind, at least for Pharisees, that they believed in such things. Okay, pause there just to summarize for a minute. We covered both Hebrew and Greek, Old Testament, New Testament. 3 words: soul, spirit, and we'll say ghost, as we saw there in Matthew. So this is to show that these entities, these kind of things, existed in Old Testament as well as Christian thought. And it's not a surprise. I admit that the Christians borrowed the word for ghost from the pagans, but what did the pagans think the word meant? Ghost. If the Jews and Christians didn't believe in such things, why use that word? All right, I know that we spent a lot of time there, but it's because I didn't used to believe in any of this. But after acquiring some Greek and Hebrew skills, reading what scholars say who lecture on this word, Rephaim, or phantasma, that, oh, okay, I didn't know that, because the religious community that I came from didn't believe in such things and kind of kept it a secret. They didn't talk about that soul might mean an immaterial part of a person, or the spirit might refer to the immaterial part of a person that was in death or in Sheol. Or certainly they didn't bring up Rephaim. This opened my eyes. All right, the next thing that's still very much part of this picture is Sheol. What is Sheol? And there is a Greek correspondence in the New Testament, where in the Old Testament it mentioned the word Sheol, like Psalm 16:10, is quoted in the New Testament in Acts chapter 2 is given the Greek word Hades. So that's how we know that Sheol and Hades go together in the Jewish Christian mind. So we're going to look at some verses about the term Sheol. All right, so Scott, let's go to Genesis 37, 33 through 35. Okay, we're going to look at that. All right. Now, poor old Jacob, his son Joseph. He sent his son Joseph off to do an errand. He doesn't come back. Sent his son Joseph going off with that robe of many colors. We normally think of many fabrics, very pretty. And he doesn't come back. And the brothers of Joseph, they've sold him in slavery. Well, they bring back his coat dripped in animal's blood and said, hey, Father, do you recognize this coat? This is all we found. We don't know where he is. All we found is this coat. And verse 33, and Jacob, he identified it and said, it is my son's robe. He recognized it. Oh, no. And they allow dad to draw conclusions. And here's his conclusion. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. He's scattered across the desert. Oh no. So verse 34, then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to what? The desert? My son has been buried in the desert. No, Jacob didn't believe his son was buried anywhere, right? Because these wolves have eaten parts of him and his bones are scattered here and his shoes are over there and his flesh has been eaten. So where does Jacob say he's going to go? He says, no, I shall go down to Sheol. And there it is. In verse 35, I shall go down to Sheol to my son. This is not the grave. He says, go down to my son, mourning. Going down to Sheol to my son, mourning. In other words, he's going to cry himself to death. Thus his father wept for him. Okay, so in this verse 36, meanwhile, they sold poor Joseph to down to Egypt to a guy named Potiphar. Okay, so what does that tell us about Sheol? Well, Sheol is not, by the way, it is not the grave. The Hebrew kever means grave. That's not what this is. And that's a physical place where you bury dead bodies. That's not what Sheol is. Okay. Sheol is a place for the dead. And we're going to see that in a moment as we look at some examples. But here's some overall things that we're going to see as we look at these scriptures. Both the good and bad go to Sheol. Wow. And only dead humans are said to go there. We never read of demons going to Sheol or animals. So we're going to look at some verses on this. All right. Okay. We're going to, let's pick up, well, we already looked at Psalm 16:10, that the Christ, his soul went to Sheol. So we've seen that. Scott, let's bring up Job 14:13. Job 14:13. Okay, 14:13. Job, he was sick. Maybe you recall the story of Job. He was miserable sick. Not just miserable sick, but he had lost his family, not his wife, lost his kids. They'd been killed. His servants, they were killed by marauders, thugs, robbers. His business was gone. And he was so miserable. He says, oh, to God, oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, that you would conceal me until your wrath be past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. So he is praying to die, and then God will, his anger will be gone, and he will remember and call him forth from Sheol, the grave. So this is not the physical grave. We've already seen that. That's a different word, kever. He says, I would go and die and be in Sheol. Now, Job is, we think, from the Septuagint, which is the Old Testament Greek version of Job, has some notes in it that would say that Job is a relative at a later time, a couple generations after Abraham. So Job, it seems reasonable, he would have known the story of Abraham, he did, known the story of Abraham and his son, Isaac, and how he believed that God would keep his promise. Even though he killed Isaac, God must therefore have the ability to raise the dead. And just as God would have raised Isaac, God could raise Job himself. So he says, hide me in Sheol, conceal me, appoint a time, and remember me. But in the meantime, where is Job hiding? Okay, where is he hiding? In a place. This is not the grave, Sheol. And we've kind of touched on this before. This is where the Messiah, his soul, resides. He doesn't stay there, though, as we saw in Psalm 16:10. He doesn't stay there, but he is remembered and he sees the pathway of life. Here, Job says, set a time and remember me. Then in verse 14, he says, if a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service I would wait till my renewal should come. That's the resurrection. Now, where is he waiting, though? In Sheol. And what is waiting there? Well, his body is in the grave, kever. So what is it that's waiting in Sheol? Well, we've seen that. The nephesh, the soul, is in Sheol. Well, that's where the Messiah is. His soul was, at least for a short time. And then the Rephaim, at least for the good ones that God has declared righteous to bring into his kingdom, that's where they will be called from, Sheol. Verse 15 says, you would call and I would answer you. You would long for the work of your hands. In other words, we are made in the image of God. We are the works of his hands. And God will call us forth from that. And that is what Job was expecting and hoping for. Let's do one last one to show that the good go to Sheol. Let's go to Isaiah 38:10. One more, Isaiah 38:10. Isaiah 38:10. This is Hezekiah, and he is afraid that he is going to die. Well, everybody dies, but he thought it might be a little early. He says, Hezekiah said, I said, in the middle of my days I must depart. I am consigned to the gates of Sheol for the rest of my years. So where is Hezekiah thinking he's going to go himself? Not someone else, not my life force, but me, Hezekiah. Where? Consigned to the gates of Sheol. So it's got gates that are locked, keep you in there for the rest of my years. And this is what he thought. He thought he was for sure going to die. And God says, no, well, eventually, yes. But for now, God is going to lengthen his life. That's what we saw there. Okay, so that's evidence that the good go to Sheol. Who did we see? The Messiah, Psalm 16. Job, he's a good guy. And then we saw, well, we already saw the one about Jacob, said he was going to go down to Sheol to see his son. So there's another case of Jacob. He's a good guy. And Hezekiah here believed he was going to go down to into Sheol. Well, the bad, they go there too. So we're going to Scott, if you would bring up Isaiah 14, beginning in verse 9, let's say Isaiah 9, Isaiah 14, verse 9 and following. Oh, Isaiah 14:9. Look what's there. Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. So the bad guys, remember, Isaiah is largely a part about the bad guys receiving judgment, and some of the Jews that were also disobedient. They're going to die. Where do they go? Now, I admit this is here kind of metaphorical speech, and you could take this all to mean something else. But is it a metaphor of pagan ideas, or is it a metaphor that draws on Jewish ideas? Anyway, it says, Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. So this is speaking of the bad guys, they die. It rouses the shades. Guess what that is? There's another occurrence of the Rephaim. So who goes to Sheol? Well, the dead do. Oh, even the Rephaim go there. It rouses the Rephaim, the shades, to greet you, all who are leaders of the earth. It raises from their thrones all who were kings of the nations. Now, this is the verse where some get the idea. See, these Rephaim, they're all pagan, dead hero kings. Well, we already saw that in Proverbs, that's not what they are. We even saw another passage later on in Isaiah that's not what they are. So this is an example of shades. Do kings, would they be shades? Well, yeah, they would be shades too, but it's not the only meaning for these Rephaim. The Rephaim could refer to anybody who dies and goes to Sheol. We saw a couple in Proverbs. Okay, so these are, yes, they are shades. And what happens? The dead come to Sheol, and those who are already there, it's plural, it's not just some life force that's there, already there. And this builds on it. And okay, it could be figurative that they're there. Are they really going to get up off their thrones and speak? That part would be, I get it, that would be figurative. But it's not drawing on pagan ideas. Rather, Isaiah is giving prophecy of what's going to happen. These bad guys are going to end up in Sheol, the place of the dead, and draws this picture. Okay, you thought you're so important, so great. Well, guess what? You're going to die, and then you are going to go down to Sheol, and it is as if the dead, they are disturbed from their sleep, because that was typically the picture. They would be disturbed in sleep, and they're going to wake up, and they're going to greet you. Ha, see? And then what does it say in verse 10? Well, it says, it raises from their thrones all who were kings of the nation. So as if they get up out of their thrones. And verse 10, all of them will answer and say to you. So it's as if they could speak. I don't think that's a pagan idea. It's a Jewish idea that they could, if they're roused up, they could speak. And all of them will answer and say to you, you too have become as weak as we. You have become like us. Okay, so we'll scroll down to get down to verse 11 and 12. He says, your pomp is brought down to Sheol. So you were bragging so much, you're so important. The sound of your harps, the maggots are laid as a bed beneath you, and worms are your covers. So this is a little figurative, but what does it teach us? That in the Jewish mind, where do the shades, the Repha, the souls, where do they go? To Sheol. And then he says, verse 12, how you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn, how you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. So these bad guys, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, yeah, they're going to die, and there they are going to be shades or souls in Sheol. Okay, so that point brings us to a place of logical stopping point, because what do we see here is that Sheol is a place for the dead. The good go there, the bad go there. The soul goes there, the Rephaim goes there in Sheol. So there is a place for the dead to go. They exist. And they all go to this place, Sheol. And this state is what's called the intermediate state. It's not the resurrection. Please do not think of this as being the resurrection. It's not. This is, and this is the view that I've come to. Most Christians hold to this, not all, but that this is a place of intermediate state where the soul, spirit, ghost exists. They apparently seem to be in kind of a sleepy condition. We saw there in Isaiah, they might be roused from their sitting position, but they're kind of, we'll say, chilling, resting, and they're just waiting. So what this says is that after death, at least so far in our conversation, we found that there is a place, an intermediate place, where they're what? What did Job say in Job 14? What did he say? Waiting to be called by God. And that would be the resurrection. We saw that in Isaiah as well. They're in this place. And someday in the future, the earth will give birth to the Rephaim, the spirits, the ghosts, and along with their bodies, be raised at physical resurrection. All right, so that kind of covers it. And I think we'll put that on pause for now. That may extend this topic some other time and further, but at least we've covered this much. That is, there's some place, an intermediate state where the dead wait and for the resurrection. Okay.
All right. Well, that was really great, Jay. I'm finding it interesting, and so are the people in the chat. Robert said, "Love when Jay Hess is on here," and Jade said, "Oh, this is a good review on Rephaim and spirits, Sheol." So yeah, very interesting, and so much Old Testament verses that a lot of people don't really dig into.
Right.
One thing I wanted to ask you, we know that you're a former Jehovah's Witness. We talked about this in previous videos on our channel, and I understand that the group that you're talking about that denies the existence of the soul is that group, the WatchTower Bible and Tract Society.
Yes.
So yeah, I'd like to ask you, could you give us like a brief overview of what their teaching is, and then talk about how you started to see cracks in it and came to see that it was incorrect?
Yes. Yes, in fact, this was an area of my strength whenever I was a good, faithful Jehovah's Witness at that time. And if we got on topics, I try to get people off of other topics onto the soul and spirit and all that, because I thought I'd had it all figured out, because I was read everything the WatchTower published, and I even was asked to give public lectures on this. And somewhere I actually have a recording of myself giving a lecture on this as a Jehovah's Witness, that the soul is just the person, and when you die, the soul dies, because the soul is just you, the person, and it doesn't really go anywhere or do anything. Sheol is just a concept, and it's, even though it's mentioned a lot in the Old Testament, it doesn't really mean anything. And you just die, and the good and the bad go there, but they don't really go there. And of course, there's nothing to go there. And it's just a figure of speech that doesn't actually refer to anything in particular. And there's no existence. There's certainly no consciousness. Now, where some misunderstand the Jehovah's Witnesses, some think that Jehovah's Witnesses believe the soul exists, but it's just napping, sleeping. That is not the case. The soul does not exist for the Jehovah's Witnesses. So they technically don't believe in soul sleep. They believe in soul non-existence. And soul sleep, there are groups that do believe the soul exists as a spirit form and kind of sleeps. Well, that's not terribly different than what we saw, but the term soul sleep often is confused with what the Jehovah's Witnesses supposedly believe, which they don't believe, is that the soul goes to take a nap. No, so Jehovah's Witnesses believe the soul just simply doesn't exist. It's a person that dies and doesn't exist anymore. The Jehovah's Witnesses make a little distinction with the word spirit. That is just the life force. And animals have a life force, and humans have a life force. And what happens to it? Well, it just evaporates. It just goes somewhere. And that's what I thought for a long, long time. And it's not part of the resurrection. Well, not really, but a person dies and they cease to exist, and the spirit ceases to exist, although there's no verse that says anything like that. And any verse that you might try and pull out, they say, oh, it's figurative. It doesn't mean that. Okay. And, but where's the verse that says the spirit ceases to exist? Well, there isn't any. And then if you ask about the other word, Rephaim, they have no idea what that is. But they, spirit, as I said, it just ceased to exist. It evaporates. And one of the illustrations that they'll use is that when you have a light bulb and it has energy in it and the electricity, and you can see the brightness of it. But when you turn out the light, where does the electricity go? It's gone. The light just evaporates. Well, that's what happens to you. And then you say, well, what is the resurrection? And their answer is, God is really clever. God is so smart. He can remember everything about you, just like an old movie can bring back images of someone who's long dead. And God is so clever, he can rebuild you. And they don't use the word clone, and they'd rather not, because that really scares them. But it's actually that. They believe that God will clone you. So in their publications, they don't say it a lot, but they have said it on a couple occasions, that when you die, you cease to exist, and God recreates you from his memory at the resurrection. And that goes for everybody, including Jesus. When Jesus died, there was no spirit, but God, who's really clever, remembered what Jesus was like and recreated him. So it turns out that, and it gets worse, because when Jesus came to earth, and I remember, well, here's what happened. I was challenged by a good Christian who said, really? There's no spirit? And I said, no. And he says, have you checked this out? And I was thinking, well, sure, the WatchTower has showed me all of these important things. He says, why don't you check this out? So I got a concordance, a Young's concordance, and lists all the occurrences of the Old Testament word ruach in one place. And I read through every single one. And after I don't remember, 900 occurrences, I came back and said, I have been tricked. They cut out all the verses that said otherwise. And on that day, I dumped their doctrine. I didn't want to say it out loud to anybody else, but I was dumping that doctrine. And at a later time, I said, I need to write and find out what because you were allowed at that time to write their headquarters and ask Bible questions. And I had a bunch of them, and I was disturbed because the WatchTower taught something, and it just isn't the way it is. And I wrote to them and I said, what about Jesus? I thought what is their answer going to be? Jesus came to earth. Well, his body, he didn't have a physical body before he came to earth. So what is it that came to earth? And I still have their answer. And I shared their answer. It was official, WatchTower headquarters, this is their official answer. And I shared it with a friend. I said, what is this saying? And this guy was an elder for Jehovah's Witnesses, and he read it and he says, I can't make heads or tails out of it. In fact, this elder made a joke. He says, I feel sorry for the scholar at the Jehovah's Witness that wrote this, because this poor fellow did not say no to drugs. Because the answer was so bizarre. Their answer was that it's a miracle. God transferred the life force of Jesus from the heaven into the womb of Mary. And how did God do it? It was a miracle. And my question was, what was it that God brought to earth? It would have had to have been the Spirit. And their answer was, well, there is no such thing. And it's a miracle. And that's how you double talk something without answering the question. So I dumped that doctrine. That was the first doctrine I dumped.
Mm.
On the business of the soul and the spirit. So that's how, yes, it is a Watchtower teaching. They still hold to it. And I have used this helping other Jehovah's Witnesses. One that was my oldest, dearest friend. He was not afraid to talk to me, even though I was expelled from the Watchtower for having worshiped Jesus. And I told him and taught him about the word Repha and the Rephaim. And then all of a sudden that makes sense. And why is this a vulnerable place with Jehovah's Witnesses? Because they realize, if they think about it, that God will not bring them back. This is what scared me as a Jehovah's Witness, because I realized that when I died, even though I was a loyal Jehovah's Witness, going all the meetings, going out door to door, knocking on doors, if I died, the best that would happen is that somebody would get recreated, a clone, who would think he's me. And he was going to go and spend all eternity in paradise thinking he's me. While I, the loyal J-Dub, who faced all these temptations in life and was pressed to go door to door and not supposed to go to college and deny all these things. And for a time, we, as Jehovah's Witnesses, we were forbidden to play the game of chess. I love chess. Here I was denied all this stuff. What do I get out of it? I get cloned. And I've shared this with Jehovah's Witnesses, and they understand it. And I said, could God remake you? And they go, well, yes. I said, how many times could God do that? Could he remake you once and then right next to you redo it again and do it again? Could God do that, or God's hands tied and he can't do that? Well, no, God could do that. And I says, okay, which one is you? Well, they're all me. I says, you believe that? If you die and God clones you 3 times, which one of those is you? And are you fine with that idea that all 3 of those guys are going to live out eternity? And I use this on one Jehovah's Witness that he says, oh, I know the answer. I will be there, but I'll think I'm the real thing, but I won't realize I'm a clone. And I says, really? In the kingdom, will you study Watchtower beliefs and theology? Yes. I said, well, then you'll know as you study and you read about yourself, you'll realize you're a clone. He goes, oh, right. Oh, that's depressing. So this is a point where Jehovah's Witnesses are very vulnerable, because this is an unhappy doctrine. They'll say, oh, we believe in the resurrection. It's so wonderful, so great. No, you believe in the cloning. This is very depressing. And through that, I have used that to reach them, because once they understand what the Bible really says, it brings them relief, because they come to know what the real resurrection is.
Right. I like that. Your reward for all that hard work, knocking on doors and Bible study, is non-existent. That is not a reward in anybody's book. So it doesn't work out. I wanted to read another comment by Jade. I'm assuming Jade is a woman. She says, I was raised SDA and learning now the ancient faith. So we praise God that Jade is out of the Seventh-day Adventist group and headed toward, into the truth, we assume. And we pray that she will find good people to help disciple her if she hasn't already. And so thank you, Jade, for sharing that. We get lots of people in the chat who have come out of something, and we like Jay, and we really love these stories also. What your insight, Jay, that's just so fascinating to me, the chinks that you see in these false teachings and the false doctrines and theologies. It's so kind of obvious once you start playing it out, and yet most people don't think it through. I have a question that I think is difficult, and a lot of people don't quite, or there's some discussion about it, and I've never seen any like resolution. But since you studied this, I was wondering if you'd read anyone who has come to something that they consider a solution about where does the soul end and the spirit begin, or are they the same? What is the difference? What is the overlap, as you said?
You are right. In some cases, they are in Hebrew parallel thought. They are so alike that it's hard to see a difference. Famous, the Hebrews 4:12, dividing of the soul and the spirit. There's a case. The word of God is so sharp it can divide between the bone and the marrow and the soul and the spirit. Where do you divide in Hebrews 4:12? Where do you divide the difference between the bone and the marrow? Very small difference. It's hard. How would you do that? It'd take a very sharp sword, a sharp knife. So where's the difference between the soul and the spirit? So a conjecture, because there is so little to go on it, but the soul, okay, think of bone and marrow. The bone surrounds the marrow. The marrow is inside the bone. Now remember, soul has a broader meaning. It can mean the whole person, including the body. The spirit has a refined meaning. It never means the body, but there could be this overlap. So just as, how do you divide the bone and the marrow? Well, you have to kind of do this, and the marrow, it's kind of the bone, but it's kind of not the bone, and you can divide it. That's my way I answer this between the soul and the spirit. The soul is the whole person, and it includes the spirit, but you can actually divide and refer to the spirit as separate from the body. And some scholars draw it elsewhere. The soul meaning the personnel, or the maybe the consciousness, or the seat of learning, and then the spirit is maybe inclination and intuition. I don't know. I've read those answers. I'm not convinced about that. I prefer the bone and marrow, soul and spirit illustration myself.
Yeah, the way I look at that passage is, it says the word of God is sharper than a two-edged sword. I'm talking about Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12. And the sword of the spirit can divide between bone and marrow. But if you think about taking a physical sword and trying to cut the marrow out of a bone, you could never do it. We could never do that. So it's saying the sword of the spirit can do what's impossible for us. God can do things that we can't do. But for us, so yeah, and then as a result, we probably can't comprehend that where the division of soul and spirit is, at least now, maybe someday in the next life, but maybe not. We just don't know. But yeah, that's a great passage. I think this is a good place to stop. Jody, did you have questions or comments?
Well, I know a lot of our critics, they will say, well, in Ecclesiastes 9:5, they say the dead know nothing. So obviously the dead doesn't exist after we die in this body. How do you actually respond to that, Brother Jay?
Thank you. There are some good questions here, and there's more. We'll do that one, and maybe some other time we'll go into other things, such as Samuel and King Saul. So that's another story. But this one, Ecclesiastes 9:5 and 10. If you read the context, that will drive it, that there's something more going on there. So Ecclesiastes 9:5 and 10. So I'm going to quickly look that up. Okay, good.
Got it on the screen here.
Yes. And I'm going to, now that we got it on the screen, you read 5. I have to move something. There we go. If you stop at verse 5, okay, the memory, for the living know that they will die, and the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Okay, and you stop there. Okay, well, wait a minute. Let's scroll down to, okay, verse 6. Verse 6. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever, for what? Forever, they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. Two things I want to point out there in verse 6. Forever and done under the sun. If this is all to be meant to be revealed truth and a state of biblical truth, then there is no resurrection for anybody, because forever they have no more share to be what is done. There's no resurrection. Well, and the answer is that there's something else going on here. In the book of Ecclesiastes, read through and get your highlighter. And whenever you see the phrase done under the sun, mark it. Done under the sun. Then look for all the phrases that say under heaven. They are different. The things that are done under the sun are from a human perspective. Think of it as from the perspective of an atheist.
Mhm.
Everywhere you got, what does an atheist believe on? Whatever I can see under the sun. Sunlight, I can believe it. The believer, the true believer who believes in God, has another source of information. He believes in things that are revealed under heaven. And you compare, and in a way I like to characterize it, the book of Ecclesiastes is kind of a debate or a discussion between the atheist and the believer. And what it says, things under the sun, that's what an atheist would say they believe in. Yeah, it's what they believe in. They see someone dies, they're never going to rise again. They're dead, the dead is dead. But the believer goes, wait a minute. I believe in the resurrection. Abraham believed that his son Isaac would be raised, et cetera, et cetera. Job says the same thing in Job chapter 14. So the believer is beyond that. So Ecclesiastes 9, 5, and 10, and Job, okay. Or you can believe, bring up what you've got. Okay, obviously I can't show. Bring it up, Ecclesiastes 9, 10, and I want the context.
When you say context, you mean the preceding verses?
Yes. So there it says, enjoy life. Okay, this is from the perspective of what? Remember I said the atheist. Okay, enjoy life all days, because what did it say? That he has given you under the sun. Enjoy your life from the atheist view. Enjoy everything that's under the sun, because that's all you got. Okay. Verse 10, whatever your hands finds to do with all your might, because you're going to Sheol, and that's where you're going, and that's it. So my point was, when we look at the context, there's that phrase, given you under the sun. So that should make you think, this whole section is what an atheist non-believer sees with their own eyes under the sun. Ecclesiastes is not here about the resurrection. What is Ecclesiastes here about? It's what the atheist says. Now, hop over to chapter 12. I'll let you bring that up. Chapter 12. We're going to get down to verse, we'll start there. We're going to scroll down to verse 7 eventually. It says, now remember also your creator in the days of your youth. So this has switched. Instead of what the atheist believes, this is what the believer who believes in a creator believes. And how does death end it all? Well, you die, enjoy your life while you can, because after that, there's nothing even forever. Now, if we go here and you scroll down, he talks about death, and that death comes upon you. And then when death finally comes, is there more to it? Oh, yes. Look at verse 7. And the dust returns to the earth as it was. Okay, we die. The body goes to death. The body goes to death, dust. And the spirit, there's ruach. The spirit returns to God who gave it. That's different from what we read in Ecclesiastes 9, 5, and 10. There, what happens to you? You die, you go to dust. That's it. Enjoy it while you can, because this is all there is. This is saying, this is the section for believers. Yes, the body dies, you go back to dust, but that isn't the end of it. The ruach goes to God. So, and then we know that you wait there for the resurrection, because we learned that from Job. So, yes, this is funny, and I was trying to search here, and I don't think I'm not going to be able to find the quote. This is the irony. This is so funny. There was one time in the history of the WatchTower where one of the writers, researchers for the WatchTower was researching Ecclesiastes 9:5 and 10 and reached a different conclusion. He reached the Christian conclusion, and they printed it in the WatchTower. This would have been back, I think, in the 1970s. That's too much, I don't remember. But it was in a special section, and I can't pull it out now, I'm doing it from memory. But it gave the standard Christian explanation, which I just gave, for Ecclesiastes 9, 5, and 10. Perfect, great explanation. But after they wrote it and published it in the magazine, the WatchTower couldn't take it back because they'd already set it out. But then after that, stopped mentioning that article. And at that time, they were having the witnesses from the following year go back and read those articles of the previous year and reteach them in that following year. That was kind of a process that they would do in their speech class. That year, that's the one article they skipped because they didn't want Jehovah's Witnesses to know the real Christian answer, what actually appeared in their literature. However, you can find it at their website. You have to know where to find it, but it is in their literature, and you can. There's a link that you could, you can post and remember for yourself, and click on it and show a witness. This is what you published in your literature. Fun to think about it. It's actually what Christianity does teach and has taught. That it is not that you die and you forget everything and there's no hope and there's nothing left of you. No, that's what the atheist thinks. The believer believes Ecclesiastes 12. And it's kind of ironic that they published that answer. Very funny.
We'll see if you can find it, and then we'll try to post it on the YouTube channel and post it on a link so they can actually find it. So find that for us, and we'll try to put it in one of the links.
I can send that to you. I have it in another file. Just take me a minute to find it.
Yeah, these groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses, also the Mormons are always trying to whitewash their history. And it reminds me of 1984, the George Orwell novel, where the main character works for the Ministry of Information, but his job is to erase information, not to provide it, about the things that the politicians have changed their mind on. Right. So then they go and just try to whitewash the history. In 1984, they're completely effective at it.
Yes.
As much as they change their mind, all the history is made to meet it. But you can't get away with that now with all the records, with the internet. There's just too much information out there, and your attempts to cover it up are exposed, and it actually makes them look even worse.
Yes.
Just for the cover up. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Go ahead, Jody.
Great show. Enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you. That was very interesting. And the folks in the chat also expressed interest. So thank you so much for coming out and for sharing all that with us. And I know it's clear you've done a lot of research into this. So it's wonderful to have your insights. Thank you. We look forward to having you again someday, since you've become a semi-regular on our show.
Will do. Can do.
Yeah, and thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll be back. Keep watch in your YouTube feed. Thank you for your prayers. We also pray for you. And you've done a lot of research into this, so it's wonderful to what was that? Have your insights. Thank you. We look forward to having you.
Yep. Sorry.
Oh, okay. That was on your end. That was freaky.
All right. Yes, we'll catch you at a later time. Sorry, my little electronic mistake there. But good seeing you. We'll do it again.
All right. Thanks for watching. Good night. Jody, I'll give you the last word.
All right. Just please like, subscribe, and share it, and get the word out there, because there are a lot of false beliefs out there we're trying to refute biblically. So God bless. Keep us in your prayers most of all.